Let me tell you the thing nobody believes when I say it out loud. I found the most important person in my life at the bottom of a hole I dug for money. Not for love, not for some noble reason, for money, cold, stupid money. I want you to hold on to that because it matters later. I wasn't a good man that morning. I was just a tired one. My name is Corwin Ash. Most people out on the cinders just called me Ash or Old Man or worse, depending on how much I owed them. And back then I owed a lot of people a lot of things. Let me set it for you so you can see it the way I saw it. The cinders isn't a place people choose. It's a place people end up. It used to be a mining moon. Nickel iron, some rare stuff they used in jump drives, back when the big consortium still cared about this arm of the sky. For maybe 40 years the cinders was loud, furnaces going all night, ore haulers screaming up out of the gravity well every hour. My father worked the deep shafts. My father's father died in one. Then the seams played out and the consortium pulled up stakes the way rich things always do. Quiet, quick, and without leaving a note. One season there were 60,000 people on that rock. The next season there were maybe 4,000 of us. The kind who couldn't afford a ticket off or didn't have anywhere better to be. So the cinders became a scrap moon, and I became a scrap man. What that means practically is this. When a place with 60,000 people empties out overnight, it leaves things behind. Buried things, cached things, forgotten things, whole workshops sealed up under drift dust, safes that families walked away from because carrying a safe up a gravity well costs more than what's inside it. And under all of that, older still, the stuff the consortium itself buried when it was pretending the cinders would last forever. You could make a living finding it, a bad living. A coffin the morning, count your water living, but a living. I had a rig, a 6-wheeled dust crawler with a cracked canopy I'd patched so many times it looked like a spider web. I had a detector on a long arm that I called the Hound, because when it found something it made this low, happy whine, like a dog that's caught a smell it likes. And I had a bad knee, a worse back, and a debt to a man named Surith that I did not like to think about before breakfast. That's who I was, that's what I had. Now let me tell you about the morning. It was the ashfall season, which is not romantic, no matter what the name sounds like. The cinders has no real weather. What it has is the tailings. 60,000 people spent 40 years grinding rock into powder, and a lot of that powder never went anywhere. It just sits in the upper haze, and twice a local year the temperature shifts and it comes down. Fine gray stuff, soft as flour, that gets into your seals and your lungs and your food no matter what you do. The morning I'm telling you about, the ash was coming down slow and steady, like someone up in the dark was sifting it through their fingers. The sky was that dead flat color it gets, no sun, just a smear of pale light where the sun should be. Everything was gray on gray. My headlamp cut a cone through it, and the ash drifted across the beam like it had somewhere to be. I was out in the east wastes, which is a stupid place to dig because everyone knows it's picked clean. But I'd had a night. Surith's people had come by. They hadn't broken anything. They just stood in my doorway and let the cold in and reminded me politely that politely had an expiration date. So I couldn't sleep, and when I can't sleep I dig. It's better than drinking. Not by much, but by a little. The Hound had been quiet all morning. Little pings, nothing worth the fuel. A buried tin, some cable. Once, exciting for about 10 seconds, a whole dead maintenance drone that turned out to be so corroded it crumbled when I touched it. I remember I actually said out loud to nobody, "This is the last hole, then I'm going home." I've said that 1,000 times, it's a scrap man's prayer. This is the last hole, we never mean it. But this time the Hound answered me. It didn't whine soft the way it did for tin. It went up, way up. This rising note I'd only heard maybe 3 times in 12 years, and every one of those times had meant a good month. A dense mass, deep, big. And this is the part that made my heart go. The density reading was wrong for scrap. Scrap reads dirty. Mixed metals, rust, plastic, junk. This read clean. Clean and layered in a way that meant somebody a long time ago had built something to last. I stood in the ash with my hands shaking a little, and I did the math I always did. Density like that, depth like that, this was a consortium cache. Had to be. Emergency reserve maybe, or an old assay vault. The consortium used to bury caches all over the cinders, sealed against the dust in case a shaft flooded or a war came. Half of them they never marked and never dug back up. Finding one hole was the thing every scrap man dreamed about and almost none of us ever did. I could pay Surith, that was my first thought, God forgive me. My very first thought, standing over the most extraordinary thing that ever happened in this arm of the sky, was, I can pay Surith, and maybe have enough left to fix the canopy. That's the truth. I told you I wasn't a good man that morning. I got the excavator arm off the rig, and I started to dig. It took most of the day. The ground on the cinders isn't dirt. It's compacted tailings and old regolith, packed hard as concrete in the deep layers. I went through 3 cutting heads. My back locked up twice and I had to lie flat in the crawler and breathe through it before I could go on. The ash kept falling the whole time, filling the hole back in slow at the edges, so it felt like fighting the moon itself. And the whole time the hound sang. The deeper I got, the more sure I was. Because it wasn't just one mass anymore. As the resolution cleared, I could see structure, a container, roughly 2.5 meters long, rounded, reinforced, sitting in a nest of some kind of shock-dampening foam that had gone brittle and gray with age. Somebody had buried this thing carefully, reverently almost, not the way you dump a cache, the way you bury something you love and mean to come back for. I should have known then. Some part of me maybe did. But I was tired and I was broke and I wanted it to be treasure, so I told myself it was treasure. The light was almost gone when I finally got the excavator claws under the lip of it, and I felt it shift. That first movement of something that's been still for a very, very long time. It came up out of the ground, slow, streaming gray dust, and I swung it over onto the flat and set it down as gentle as I could, because even greedy, even stupid, some old instinct in me said, careful. Then I climbed down into the hole beside it with my lamp, and I got my first real look. It wasn't a consortium cache. I knew that the second the dust cleared off the top. The consortium built ugly. Everything they made looked like a threat. Sharp edges, hazard colors, stamped serials, warnings in 6 languages telling you what would happen if you were dumb enough to open it. This was not that. This was beautiful. The shell was a pale, pearled material I'd never seen, smooth as a river stone, curved the way a seed is curved, or an egg. There were markings on it, but not warnings. They were, I don't have a better word, they were kind. Soft flowing lines like writing, like a lullaby somebody had written down. And set into the top, running the whole length, was a strip of dark glass, frosted over on the inside with age. I knelt down and I wiped the glass with my sleeve, and my sleeve came away gray, and under it the glass was still frosted, so I wiped again, harder, breathing on it, rubbing with my thumb. And a face looked back at me. I want you to understand what that does to a person. Alone, ash falling, bad knee, worse back, in a hole at the ass end of a dead moon expecting silver. A face. A small face. A child's face. Gray-blue skin, smooth, and a spray of markings across the cheeks like freckles made of light, dim now but there. Eyes closed. Lashes long and pale. And around the head, floating, not touching, a corona of hair so fine it moved like it was underwater, drifting in whatever slow current the pod kept inside itself. She was maybe 8 if she'd been human, which she was not. I fell back on my hands and I made a sound I'm not proud of. Half a shout, half a prayer. I scrambled up the side of the hole and stood at the top with my chest heaving and the ash coming down on me, and I looked at that thing lying there glowing faint blue in the dark, and my whole life reorganized itself around it in about 4 seconds. Because there are laws. Out here, past the reach of anybody civilized, there aren't many. But there's one everybody knows. You do not touch a stasis pod. And you especially do not touch one with a compact seal on it. Let me explain about the compact, so the rest makes sense. Humans are new out here. I mean new. We came up the gravity well of our own little world barely 200 years back, and we spread fast and loud, the way we do, and the galaxy was already old and settled and mostly did not care for it. The big power in this arm of the sky was the Vorath Compact. Old, cold, efficient. They weren't cruel exactly. Cruelty is personal, and the Compact had never taken anything personally in 10,000 years. They were just certain about how the galaxy should be arranged, which species belonged in it and which ones did not. They'd made whole peoples cease to be a factor, as their language put it, and they'd done it the way you'd clear a field. No hate, just work. Humans, so far, were tolerated. Barely. We were too new to be worth a war and too many to be worth the trouble. We got the scraps, moons like the cinders, roots nobody wanted, and a very clear understanding that we survived at the Compact's convenience and not one day past it. And the marking on the top of that pod, near the girl's feet, half worn away but unmistakable once I saw it. 3 linked rings inside a broken circle. That was the Compact's mark for a silent species, a people they had ended. That mark meant, this exists no longer by our decree, and anything bearing it is to be reported and surrendered. I'd found a child of a people the Compact had erased, and I was, by every law that ruled my little gray life, supposed to call it in. I'm going to be honest about that night, because if I clean it up you won't believe the rest. I almost called it in. I sat in my crawler with the pod strapped to the flatbed behind me, and the ash ticking on the canopy, and I ran the numbers, because running numbers is what I did instead of feeling things. The Compact paid bounties for reporting silenced remnants. Good bounties. Enough to clear Surath, enough to leave the cinders, enough to maybe buy a little place downwell where the air was real and my back would stop hating me. I could hand this thing over and the Compact would take it away and do whatever they did, and I would never have to know. I could go back to being tired instead of being terrified. All I had to do was send one signal. I had the signal drafted. I had my thumb over the send. And then the pod behind me made a sound. Just a little one. A soft chime and then a hiss, and a bar of light ran along the seam of the seal, and the frosted glass began, very slowly, to clear. The digging had woken it, or the movement, or 12 years too late, a timer somebody set with shaking hands had finally reached its end. I don't know, but the pod was opening and I could do nothing about it, and I sat frozen and watched as the seal broke with a sigh of cold vapor that rolled out across the cabin and misted my window. And she opened her eyes. They were gold, not human gold, not eye-color gold. Actual gold, like light through honey, with a dark seed of a pupil in the middle, and they went wide and terrified the instant they focused, because the first thing this child saw after however many years asleep was an old gray human staring at her through the vapor with his thumb over a compact signal. She scrambled, that's the only word. She got herself back against the far wall of the pod, small and shaking, her mouth open in a silent cry. No sound came out. Her voice wasn't awake yet, and her hands came up in front of her face, and I saw they had one finger too many, long and delicate, and I saw she was terrified of me, and every single number in my head went quiet at once. I have thought about that moment more than any other in my life. Because I'd been through everything on that flat moon by then. I'd buried both my parents. I'd lost the one woman who ever put up with me to a fever that better air would have cooled. I'd stood in doorways and been threatened, and I'd been the one doing the threatening once or twice when I was younger and stupider. I thought I was empty. I thought there was nothing left in Corwin Ash to reach. And then this child looked at me like I was the end of her world. and something I thought was long dead in me stood up. I took my thumb off the signal. I remember I actually pulled my whole hand back slow and held it up, palm out, the way you do with a spooked animal, the way you do with anything scared that could hurt you or that you could hurt. "Hey," I said, my voice came out rough. I hadn't spoken to another living thing in 3 days. "Hey, it's nobody's going to hey." Great speech, real poet. She didn't understand a word. Of course she didn't. But something in the tone must have landed, or something in the fact that I'd moved away instead of toward her because her breathing slowed just a hair. She stayed pressed against the wall of the pod, but she watched my hand instead of my face, and my hand wasn't doing anything, and I think that was the first thread of it. The very first thread. I very slowly deleted the signal. I didn't decide to. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I didn't sit there and weigh right and wrong and choose the noble path. My hand just did it, the way it had almost sent it. I watched my own thumb delete the thing that would have made me rich, and I felt sick and light and terrified all at once, and I thought, clear as anything, in the voice of my dead mother, "Well, Corwin, you've gone and done it now." The first 3 days, she wouldn't come out of the pod. I didn't push. I don't know a lot, but I know what a scared thing needs because I've been one. It needs to be left alone, and it needs to know that the leaving alone is a choice you're making, not neglect. So I did that. I drove the crawler back to my dig shack out on the east wastes, not my place in the settlement, because if I brought her there someone would see, and if someone saw, someone would talk, and if someone talked, the compact would come. Out in the wastes there was nobody but the ash. I set the pod down inside the shack near the heater. I left the seal open so she could get out if she wanted, and I put food near it. Not my food, I didn't know if she could eat my food. I put out water, and some of the pale nutrient paste from the ration crates, and a few things I honestly just guessed at. Then I went to the other side of the shack and I worked on my rig, and I didn't look at her, and I talked. I talked the whole time. Nonsense mostly, about the crawler, about the bad knee, about Surith, who I now had no way to pay, which was its own kind of terror I was ignoring, about the ash and where it came from and why the sky was gray. I don't know why I talked. Maybe so the silence wouldn't scare her. Maybe so it wouldn't scare me. On the first day, she watched me the whole time and didn't move. On the second day, when I woke up, the water was gone. On the third day, I woke up because there was a small warm weight against my side. She'd come out in the night. She was curled against me, in the crook of my arm, fast asleep. One 4.5-fingered hand knotted in the front of my jacket like she was afraid I'd get up and leave. Her hair had drifted over both of us like a net of pale light. I lay very still. My arm went asleep. My back was screaming. I did not move for 2 hours. That was the morning I stopped thinking of it as a thing I'd found. Her name, as near as I could ever make it in a human mouth, was Syl. It took a while to learn even that. Her voice came back over about a week, and it turned out her people spoke partly in sound and partly in light. Those freckle markings on her cheeks and along her arms would shift and glow in patterns while she talked, and I think half of what she was saying I never caught because I didn't have the eyes for it. But she was a child, and children learn, and she learned my language faster than I ever learned any of hers. Kids are like that. They soak up the world because they haven't yet learned to be afraid of it. She'd point at things and I'd name them. Crawler, heater, ash, ash. Ash, she thought that was hilarious, that the whole sky was made of one word. She'd point up and say ash, and laugh, this light chiming laugh that did something to the inside of my chest every single time. She called me a word in her own tongue that she never translated. I asked once when her language was good enough. She just did the light thing on her cheeks, slow and warm, and looked at me and wouldn't say. I stopped asking. Some things you don't need translated. I pieced her story together over weeks, in fragments, in the way children tell you the biggest things sideways while playing with something else. Her people were called, the closest I can write it is the Ema. They were old, older than the compact maybe, not warriors, not builders of empires. She used a light word for them that I came to understand meant something like keepers or gardeners or the ones who remember. They'd lived quiet, and that in the end was the crime. The compact didn't silence peoples for being dangerous. It silenced them for being different in a way that couldn't be corrected. The EMA wouldn't be arranged, so the compact arranged them out of existence. And in the last days, her people had done what a keeping people does. They'd try to keep something. They'd taken their children, the ones young enough to be saved, and they'd put them in seed pods built to sleep for 100 years, and they'd scattered them across 100 forgotten worlds, buried in the deep, marked only with a lullaby in the hope, the tiny, human-shaped hope, that 100 years on, the compact would have moved on, or softened, or forgotten, and the children could wake up in a kinder galaxy and go on. They'd buried Syl on the cinders, on a nothing moon at the edge of nowhere, because nowhere was the safest place to hide a treasure. And 100 years later, a broke old man with a bad back had dug her up looking for silver. I have to tell you about the day it went wrong, and I have to tell you honest, because it's the whole reason any of this matters. We had almost 8 months. 8 months in the shack in the wastes, the two of us, and I will tell you those were the best days of my sorry life, and I didn't even fully know it while they were happening, the way you never do. I taught her to drive the crawler, her sitting in my lap steering while I worked the pedals, both of us yelling. I taught her to play the old card games my father taught me. She taught me to see, a little, the patterns in her light speech, and by the end I could catch maybe 1 word in 10, and every time I caught one her whole face would go bright with pride, prouder of me than anybody'd been in 40 years. I stopped digging for money. I dug for us for what we needed, and I sold just enough scrap in the settlement to keep us in rations, and I stayed quiet, and I told nobody, and I thought, I actually let myself think that maybe we'd made it. Maybe nowhere was safe enough. Maybe the galaxy really had forgotten this little gray rock. I forgot about Surith. That was the mistake, not the compact. Surith, the small, stupid human thing the way it always is. Because I'd stopped paying, and I'd stopped being seen in the settlement, and a man like Surith doesn't like being ignored, and one day when I was out digging, he sent his people to the dig shack to find out where his money was. And they found a gray-skinned, gold-eyed child with light in her cheeks. I came back at dusk with a load of scrap, and I saw the door of the shack standing open, and I knew. I knew before I stopped the crawler. You know that feeling, when the shape of a thing is wrong before your mind can say why. She was gone. There'd been a struggle a chair over, the water spilled, one of her drawings she'd started drawing, torn on the floor, and on the table a note in Surith's ugly hand. You've got something worth a lot more than what you owe. Compact pays well for silenced remnants. Come talk before I make the call myself. He didn't understand what he had. To him she was a payday, same as she'd almost been to me 8 months before. He was going to hold her and haggle, and if I didn't pay enough, he was going to sell her to the compact for the bounty. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I drove into the settlement through the ash dark with my hands white on the wheel, and I want to tell you I had a plan, but I didn't. I had an old fléchette pistol I'd never fired at a living thing, and a heart going like a shaft hammer, and one single thought, over and over in my dead mother's voice and then in my own. They will not have her. They will not have her. Whatever else, they will not have her. Surith kept his operation in the old assay office in the settlement's dead center. I went in the front. I didn't have the sense to go any other way. And I found him in the big front room, sitting behind the assayer's desk like he was somebody, with 2 of his people by the wall, and Syl in the corner behind him, small, hands up in front of her face the exact way she'd been the first moment I saw her, in the pod, in the ash. When she saw me, her whole body changed. Every light in her cheeks came on at once. She said my name the human way she'd learned to say it, Ash, just Ash. And she started toward me, and one of Surith's people put a hand out and stopped her, and she froze. There he is, Surith said. Old man Ash, sit down. Let's be reasonable. And I want to tell you I said something brave. I didn't. I stood in the door and I couldn't make my mouth work because being reasonable was exactly what I'd been 8 months ago, and I knew where reasonable led. I didn't have to say anything, because that's when the sky came down. You always hear a compact ship before you see it. It's a sound below sound, a pressure in the back of your skull, the feeling of a very large certainty arriving. The whole assay office shook with it. Dust came down from the rafters. Everyone froze. Surith had already made the call. Of course he had. He'd made it before I even got there. He'd never meant to haggle with me. He'd meant to collect the bounty and use me showing up as leverage, or a witness, or a scapegoat. I never did figure out which. It didn't matter. What mattered was the pressure in my skull, and the way the light coming through the office windows went hard and white as a compact enforcer barge settled into the square outside, and the ramp came down and they came out. I'd never seen one up close. Most people never do and live. They were tall, taller than the doorframe they had to bend to come through, and armored in that seamless compact gray that eats the light. 4 of them. They didn't hurry. They never hurry. Hurrying is for things that aren't certain of the outcome. The one in front, the officer, scanned the room once, slow, and its eyes, it had a band of dark sensor glass instead of a face, settled on sill in the corner, and it made a sound. A flat chime. And a voice came out of it in flat traders can't without any feeling at all. Silenced remnant confirmed. EMA designation extinct. A pause. The find is claimed by the compact. The finder will be compensated per statute. All others disperse. And Surith stood up smiling, because that was the sentence he'd been waiting his whole life to hear. Here is the part that people don't believe. Here is the HFY part, if you want to call it that, though I never think of it that way. I just think of it as the truest thing I know about my own kind. Nobody dispersed. Not right away. There was a beat. A held breath. And in that beat I looked around the room and I saw that it wasn't just me and Surith and his 2 thugs anymore. The ship coming down had pulled a crowd. That's what ships do on a dead moon. A compact barge landing in the square is the biggest thing to happen in years, and people had come out of the wet bars and the ration lines and the flop houses to see it. And they'd gathered at the doors and windows of the assay office, because word travels fast on a small rock, and word was that old Ash was in trouble. They were nothing, those people. Scrap men and washed-up miners and a woman who ran the ration station and a couple of kids and the old medic who tried to save my wife and failed. Nobody. The kind of nobody the compact clears like a field. And they were looking at Syl in the corner with her hands over her face. And they weren't dispersing. The officer registered it. Its head turned, slow, taking in the doorways full of gray human faces. It made the flat chime again. "This is a compact matter," the voice said. "Disperse." And old Doc Amory, the medic, 70 if he was a day, hands that shook now, Doc Amory stepped through the door into the room, into the space between the enforcers and the child, and he said, in a voice that shook worse than his hands, "She's a little girl." That was all, 4 words, "She's a little girl." The officer looked at him the way you'd look at a rock that had spoken. The remnant is designated extinct. It is not a legal person. Disperse or be dispersed. And Doc Amory, God bless him, God bless every washed-up nobody on that miserable moon, Doc Amory did not move. He just stood there in his shaking body between the guns and the child, and he said, "No. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make this sound like a battle. It wasn't. We had nothing. 4 compact enforcers could have cleared that room in about 11 seconds and walked out over all of us, and the barge would have lifted, and by morning there'd have been nothing but a story nobody in the settlement would tell. That's what should have happened. By every law of how the galaxy is arranged, that's what should have happened. But one by one they came in. The scrap men, the ration station woman. The kids pushed behind the grown-ups, but there. They filed into that room and they filled the space between the enforcers and Syl, and they stood there, unarmed, terrified, ridiculous, and they would not move. I've thought a long time about why. It wasn't bravery exactly. Half of them were shaking as bad as Doc. It wasn't that they knew her, they didn't. Most of them had never laid eyes on her. It wasn't even that they liked me. I owed half of them money too. I think it was this. I think when you've been the thing the galaxy clears like a field, when you've been the nobody on the nothing moon, the scrap the big powers walk away from, you learn exactly what that officer's flat voice meant when it said not a legal person. You've heard it about yourself. Maybe not in those words, but you felt the shape of it. You felt what it is to be a thing that's tolerated at somebody's convenience and not one day past it. And when you see it about to fall on a child, on a small scared thing with her hands over her face, something in you that you thought was long dead stands up. The same thing that stood up in me over a hole in the ash. It's in all of us. That's the part I know for sure. It's the truest thing about my kind, and it doesn't show up when things are easy. It only ever shows up like this, cornered, outmatched with nothing, standing in a doorway saying no. The officer did not understand it, I could tell. It scanned us and scanned us again, and I think it was running whatever certainty runs inside a thing like that, and the certainty was coming back wrong. Because here is the thing the Compact never learned about us, in all their 10,000 years of arranging the galaxy. We do not disperse. You can beat us, you can clear us like a field, and sometimes you do, but we do not do the reasonable thing. We do not do the math and step aside. We are the species that runs toward the burning shaft. We are the ones who stand between the gun and the child for no gain, against all odds, over somebody we don't even know because something in us cannot do otherwise. And that is not in any of your files, and it never computes, and it is the one thing that stops you every time in the half second before you fire, the not computing of it. The officer stood there in the not computing. And I stepped forward out of the crowd up to the front, until I was standing right in front of it, this thing twice my height that could have ended me with a gesture, and I was so scared I could taste it, and I said the only thing I had. You marked her pod so nobody'd come for her, I said. My voice shook, I let it. Buried at the edge of nowhere, on a rock nobody wanted. You figured no one would ever dig her up, and if they did, they'd do the reasonable thing and call it in. I swallowed. I almost did. God help me, I almost did. The band of sensor glass regarded me. But somebody's got to be the one who doesn't, I said. And it's going to be us, all of us. Right here. You want her, you clear the whole moon. You put it in your report. You explain to whoever you answer to why an entire settlement of nobodies stood in front of one silenced child on a scrap rock and would not move. You explain how that computes. Silence, the pressure in my skull. Syl behind me saying my name once soft. Ash. And the officer made the flat chime, one more time. And it said, the remnant is designated extinct. There is no remnant here. And it turned and it walked back down the ramp, and the barge lifted, and the pressure went out of my skull like a held breath let go, and the sky was just gray and full of ash again. And Syl hit me so hard she nearly knocked me down, both arms around me, all her light on at once, warm as a small sun against my chest. I've turned that last thing it said over 1,000 times. There is no remnant here. I don't think it was mercy. I don't believe a thing like that knows mercy. I think it was something colder and, in a strange way, more of a compliment than any kind word could be. I think it looked at a room full of nobodies who would not do the reasonable thing, and it did the math on clearing us, the report, the questions, the strange contagious fact of a whole people standing in a doorway saying no, and the math came back not worth it. I think we were, for one moment, more trouble than a silenced child was worth. And so, in the flat, cold ledger of the Compact, she ceased to be a remnant, because a remnant is a thing you collect, and we had made her a thing you could not collect without more cost than she was worth. We made her not worth erasing. I don't know if that's beautiful or terrible. Maybe it's both. Most true things are. Surith ran, of course he did. He was gone off the cinders within the week, and I never saw him again, and I found I couldn't even hate him, because if he hadn't made that call in his greed, that crowd would never have gathered, and if that crowd had never gathered, I'd have handed her over myself alone in the dark, and told myself it was reasonable. The medic, Doc Amory, he's the one Syl goes to now when she's got a question I can't answer, which is most of them. The ration station woman taught her to cook, or tried. Syl is a menace in a kitchen, all 4.5 fingers and enthusiasm. The whole settlement sort of quietly adopted her, in the way that a place full of people who have lost things will fold around a thing worth keeping. Nobody talks about the day the barge came. Not really. But there's a look people give her, and a look they give me, and it says everything. She's 14 now in the way I count it. Tall. Her light speech has gotten complicated and fast, and I catch maybe one word in 20, and she loves that, loves being ahead of me the way any kid loves it. She asks about her people, and I tell her what she told me back when she was small and telling me sideways. Keepers, gardeners, the ones who remember. And I think that's what she is now. The last keeper. The one who remembers a whole people on a scrap moon at the edge of nowhere, kept alive because a settlement of nobodies would not disperse. People ask me sometimes, the ones who have heard the story and don't believe it, they ask, weren't you scared? Standing up to a compact enforcer with an old fléchette pistol and a bad knee. And I tell them the truth. I tell them I've been scared my whole life. Scared of the debt, scared of the ash, scared of dying alone on a moon nobody would remember. I'd spent 60 years doing the reasonable thing and being scared anyway. And the one day I did the unreasonable thing, the one day I stood in a doorway and said no over a child I dug up looking for silver, was the only day I can remember not being scared. Not because the fear was gone, because for once it didn't matter more than she did. That's the thing I'd want you to take, if you take anything. I went into that ash looking for treasure. I was so sure I knew what treasure was. Something dense and clean and buried deep. Something I could trade for a better life. Something that would fix everything if I could just get it up out of the ground. And I found it, that's the joke. I actually found it. She was just alive, is all. That's the part I didn't expect. The best thing I ever dug up out of that dead gray moon looked at me with gold eyes and was afraid of me, and turned out to be the only real thing I ever owned, which is to say the only thing I ever loved enough to give everything for. I dug up what I thought was a treasure. Turns out I was right. I just had no idea, none at all, what treasure was.